All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome for coming tonight. We're so glad to have everyone here, and welcome to this year's Armenian Genocide Remembrance Program presented by the Center for Holocaust, Human Rights, and Genocide Education. I'm Armin McCumber, a member of the Board of Trustees. Nearly 40 years ago, Chhange expanded its mission to include Armenian genocide education. The Armenian American community is so grateful for being included in the curriculum and commends Chhange for making a significant contribution over the years to Armenian genocide education and for vigorously opposing attempts to deny the genocide even to this day. The trustees and the staff have been passionate in their commitment in not only sponsoring this program, but further including the Armenian genocide in its permanent exhibit, Journeys Beyond Genocide, The Human Experience, and publishing the tribute book, 100-Year Legacy of Courage, celebrating the lives of Armenian genocide survivors in our community. My family's genocide history is included in that tribute book, and the program is presented in memory of my grandfather, Arsen Haratunian. I'd like to thank Howard Dorman, president of the Board of Trustees, all of my other trustees, the staff, particularly Dale Daniels and Susan Yellen, and last but not least, the many hardworking volunteers for their dedication to change. If you're not a member, I hope tonight's program will inspire you to join. Through these many years, Chhange has excelled in presenting esteemed speakers for this commemoration, such as Richard Hovanessian, Peter Balakian, Deborah Dwork, Eric Bogosian, Chris Bojalian, and Taner Akçam. Carrying out the tradition of bringing you exceptional programs, tonight we're very fortunate to have as our lecturer Dr. Christina Maranci, the Mashtots Professor of Armenian Studies at Harvard University, where she is appointed in both the departments of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations and the History of Art and Architecture. Dr. Maranci has a BA in Art History from Vassar and a Master's and PhD from Princeton in Art and Archaeology. Her work explores the art and culture of Armenia in all aspects, but with a special emphasis on the late antiquity and medieval periods. She's the author of 4 books and over 100 articles and essays on medieval Armenian art and architecture, including most recently, The Art of Armenia, published by Oxford University Press in 2018. Her 2015 monograph, Vigilant Powers, 3 Churches of Early Medieval Armenia, won the Karen Gould Prize for Art History from the Medieval Academy of America, as well as the Sona Aronian Prize for Best Armenian Studies monograph from the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NASR. She's also the co-founder of East of Byzantium, a workshop and lecture series designed to support graduate students working on the Christian East. Dr. Maranci has worked on issues of cultural heritage for over a decade, with a focus on the at-risk Armenian churches and monasteries in what is now Eastern Turkey. She's the author of op-eds and essays in the Wall Street Journal, Apollo, The Conversation, and Hyperallergic. She has also been featured on National Public Radio's Open Source with Christopher Lydon. Currently, she's working on a book about the city of Ani during the 10th and 11th centuries. It's our great pleasure, and we're so happy to have Dr. Maranci here with us tonight. Doctor, I'll give it to you.
Thank you so much, Armin, and thanks to everybody at Chhange for making this such an important and marked event. And for so many of you, I think, out there, this day, April 24th, is extremely important and an extremely solemn occasion. So I would like to share my screen, and hopefully this will work out. And tell me, and I'm going to actually just go into, we're just going to do it. Like, does this look okay? Okay. Yeah, so what I wanted to speak about today was the, not just the Armenian genocide, although we'll discuss it, but specifically the impact that the genocide of the Armenians had on the material and built culture that resides within lands that were part of the Ottoman Empire. That is, I'm speaking of Armenian churches and monasteries in what is now present-day Turkey. and also all kinds of objects and artifacts um, that were either looted or sort of shepherded away from the region, and are now held in collections elsewhere. What we find is with a kind of devastating event like the genocide, it's not just its impact is on lives and histories, and the trauma is deep, and it also affects this much broader culture um, that we all have a human right to. So that's sort of my plan today. And then I'm also going to discuss the ongoing problem now of in Nagorno-Karabakh, what we Armenians call Artsakh, and what's going on now with the erasure of Armenian culture in that region. So that's my plan. That's my sort of roadmap for the next 45 minutes or so. So I'm just going to take you forward. So first I want to say that I do all this. Let me see if I can make my thing go forward. Yes, I wanted to have this lecture in memory of my very own grandparents on my mother's side. And what I'm showing you on the left is a picture of my grandmother, Keranush, on the left, and her sister, Varsenig, on the right. Keranush was born in Papert, Bayburt. Her father was Hagop Agababyan, and Hagop and his brother Sumbat were among the first to be murdered in the genocide as part of a kind of roundup of intellectuals and community leaders. So early in May, Hagop and his brother were forced to leave their homes, and long story short, they were never heard from again. And well, the history of that is in Raymond Kevorkian's magisterial volume on the Armenian genocide. Keranush was sent on the death marches to Deir Zor, but she was picked up by a Turkish woman who needed basically a slave in the kitchen. So that's where Keranush was. While she cleaned and cooked for the family. This is a doctor's family. And then by an incredible stroke of luck, Varsenig, her sister, they found Varsenig, and the two of them worked together in that home, and then they were able to move on to escape, to get to Athens, to get to Europe, and then finally to get to New York, where they settled and grew up. On the right is my on the right of the right is my grandfather, Kalust Serjanyan, who was born in Shabin Karhisar, and who was essentially saved by Jesuits in the city of Tokat. There was a school, and so he was basically saved by them, and then from Tokat he went with them to Constantinople, and from there he also made his way slowly to the United States, where Kalust and Keranush met and married and had 4 girls and 11 grandchildren, and I'm one of them. So I just wanted to take this moment to also to remember them. So let's move on to and talk a little bit about, and that's, by the way, that's their wedding picture in Brockton, Massachusetts. So this is a map that's well known to those of you who study the Armenian genocide or know about the Armenian genocide. And it's a map that shows some of the places, some of the most terrible centers for deportation and extermination in the Ottoman Empire. So what this map tells us is also the extent of Armenian communities throughout the Ottoman Empire. And along with those communities, there were churches, there were schools, there were villages and towns. And in all of these places, then we had and in some cases still have a built culture and a material culture that remains. So what I'm interested in and what I study is the medieval culture, that is the pre-modern culture of Armenians, because it was long before the genocide happened. Armenians had been living, particularly in the region where I'm sort of like signaling with my cursor, and throughout this region we have a dense array of um, medieval architecture. And so one of those important sort of dense places of Armenian architecture is in Ani. And again, this may be familiar to some of you already. It was a medieval city, an Armenian royal capital in the 10th and 11th centuries. And it continued to be a kind of thriving city until the probably 14th or 15th centuries, when it started to go into decline. Ani is most important now as a site that is kind of symbol or emblem of trauma for the Armenians, because it lies on the Turkish side of the closed international border with Armenia. So essentially, and others have put it much better than I can, Armenians from the Republic can see Ani, but cannot simply walk there or go there. And so it holds a tremendous power, evokes a sense of longing for the Armenian communities that have lost this city, that have lost family, and again, who can only look at this from afar. I study, let me just go through here. I study the monuments all around Ani, and I should say that Ani is only one site in what is now Eastern Turkey that was studded with Armenian churches. And I study, I'm fascinated by the medieval past of these structures. Who built them, the kings and queens, the princes who built them, the saints that were dedicated, to which these churches were dedicated, the liturgies that unfolded in these churches, the way they were painted and sculpted and inscribed. But they have an afterlife. The churches have an afterlife, and that afterlife is where we enter into and intersect with the problem of genocide. So I'm showing you on the left a picture of what must have been a magnificent church before its destruction. It's called Tekor. It was dedicated to to Saint Sergius or Saint Surp Sarkis. It's a 6th, or actually late 5th century structure built by princes in the region of Shirak. And the historical province in which Ani resides is Shirak. But this is what it looks like now. So on the lower right, you see Tekor in its current state. There are almost no revetment or facing stones left. I found maybe one when I was there. So by facing stone, I mean these smooth, polished stones that you see on the front of the building. I'll show you some beautiful examples in some color photos coming up. But what I'm trying to say is that this church is almost not there anymore. And what you see instead are these sort of the remains of the inner parts of the walls of the church. This isn't simply gravity taking its toll. This is deliberate destruction, which we know happened after the genocide, in particular in the decades that followed. And we know this from documentary evidence that called for the systematic destruction of the monuments. So in the case of Tekor, we have just these sort of lumps left of stone. We also have the presence of tesek, or cow dung, that's being used here for fuel, but in this so that the church has basically become a kind of barn for animals. This is a very upsetting sight for those of us, who have Armenian ancestry, and as well as those who study the medieval past. And we can also find similar kinds of cases. Not far from Tekor is what was the Cathedral of Argina. Argina was a beautiful church that had already started to fall before the genocide. And you're looking here at a photograph from the early 20th century. And you can see here that only a wall is left. But after the genocide, there was a complete erasure of this. And what I'm showing you on the right is a picture of the place where Argina Cathedral used to stand, and you can see that it has been erased. And what villagers have told a bunch of us when we were visiting is basically they were asked to leave the town one day, and military came in and blew it up. And then when they came back, there was no more church. So this is a case of not just a case of villagers pulling off stones to kind of use for building material. This is a kind of complete erasure. And unfortunately, some of you will be aware this isn't the only case, and in fact this is happening right now more recently in Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh. Another case of this is an extraordinary church, 7th century church called Bagaran, and we're doing the same kind of before and after. It's a kind of, instead of this the remains of a really extraordinary once domed church with inscriptions and sculpture and painting, we have essentially a kind of moonscape of really nothingness where the church used to stand. So this is what I come across a lot as I do my work. I am focused, I should be specific, not just on the medieval, but specifically on the royal Bagratid Kingdom of Armenia. This is Ani. This is sort of where we were kind of looking around this area at some of those churches, Tekor, Argina, but all of this area was covered in churches. And those on the in what is now Eastern Turkey have suffered a very mixed fate, and sometimes really a devastating fate. If we look at the other side of the border in the Republic of Armenia, we can see churches dating from as early as as Bagaran, which I just showed you, in considerably better shape. And this is I wanted you to kind of get a sense of what the churches look like in color, and also when they're entire. And this is a church that I teach with a lot. It's the Church of Hripsime, a 7th century church that is built over the tomb of the Virgin Martyr Hripsime, and gives us a sense of the exceptional refinement of 7th century Armenian architecture. And I want you to notice here that this stone facing, this is the same kind of stone facing that we saw at Tekor, but here, first of all, it's in better condition, obviously, but also I want you to notice how much this looks just like solid stone, that you wouldn't know necessarily that all this was a kind of revetment for a core of rubble. It looks like it's made up of solid cubes of stone with no mortar in between. But this is an effect, it's an illusion, and it's an illusion that gives you this sense of a kind of masonry skin. I want you also to notice how symmetrical this building is, and how geometric it is, with its triangles and cylinders and polygonal cylinders and pyramids. There are just so many different musical, I think it's almost like music, sort of motifs that are emerging and connecting into this one building. But I think what I'm trying to get across is that these aren't just any buildings. These aren't sort of simple rustic churches that we're talking about having been destroyed or endangered. It is really works of tremendous sophistication, engineering, art, and history, because the churches that I'm talking about are not just built, but they are inscribed with really the best quality historical testimony you can have, which is sort of in first person written at the time. Right. So a lot of histories that we know from manuscripts are just copied and copied, and eventually we end up with something printed. But this is high grade, immediate sources, witnesses to history. So when they are destroyed, we lose not just the building, but we lose an archive of information. So I mentioned to you that I'm working mostly on the 10th and 11th centuries, and that takes us back to Ani and to this extraordinary cathedral called Ani Cathedral that was constructed to be the royal cathedral of the city. This is the condition it's in now. It lost its drum and dome. There would have been a drum and dome up above. That was already lost sometime in the 19th century. But, as you can see, the structure is in, when this picture was taken, the structure was in perilous condition. So it's a structure that, again, uses that rubble masonry revetment technique. So you can see that beautiful facing stones that, that when you're there, if you've had the good fortune to go there, they sort of gleam in the sun. But you can also see where there's crumbling of the roof. You can see actually grass growing in the roof, where the moisture has that's sort of settled into the mortar, because the roof tiles don't survive, the shingles, if you like, don't survive. You can see how that's meant that you have this sort of vegetation that's growing on top. You can, maybe if you look here, you can see that there's some of the facing stones are gone around the window and up here. You can also see, which is the worst part that was noticed when this was taken, which is early 2000, maybe 2013. There's a crack running down this side, which is very bad. And this side, you can't see it in this picture, but it's already lost this corner and part of the other side, which is the north wall. Since then, it has undergone stabilization and repair, so it's now under scaffolding. But this has taken a long time to kind of to galvanize. This cultural heritage work is something that is kind of moves at a glacial pace. But I wanted you to see it, and in its sort of where it was, let's say, a few years ago. I want to jump forward a little bit and just, there's another view of it. I want to jump forward and show you the interior of this structure too, to give you a sense of what I talked about with regard to the Church of Haripsime, which is this sense of design. This is a church that is remarkable for the level of design. I'm showing you two shots of the interior. This building could have just been built with monolithic, big quadrangular piers supporting the now collapsed dome, but it wasn't. It was built instead with these incredibly faceted structures that in plan almost look like a kind of diamond shape. I'm going to show you a plan in a minute. And those piers rise up into profiled arches, meaning there are all these moldings here. And then at the very top is a pointed arch. So this is a very carefully thought out structure, one that is the work of an architect whose name we know. His name was Turdot. And Turdot also built that structure of Argina that I showed you, if you remember, the one that we saw in black and white that just had a wall left and is now completely gone. Turdot, we know from sources, was responsible for that cathedral and the new cathedral of Ani. So I want to stress here that to know the buildings and to know the name of the medieval architect who built buildings is already an unusual thing, because in the pre-Renaissance period, we often don't know who the architects are. They don't have that same kind of identity of architect genius that you get, later on with, with some of the Renaissance architects that have well-known names. So the fact that we know Turdot's name is incredible, and even more, we know that he he worked not only in Ani, where and I'm going to show you a view of Ani in a minute. He not only worked at Ani, but he also worked on the church of the great church of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, that was constructed in the 6th century, but which was damaged badly in the 10th century. And what's so so precious is that we know from an Armenian source that the same architect of Ani Cathedral went to the Hagia Sophia and repaired the dome. And so when you go, of course, when you go to Hagia Sophia now, it's a mosque, but you can still look up and see in the dome, if you look at the western arch of it, you can see this area in red that I have marked. And this is the area that archaeologists who've made a study of it believe is the area that Turdat, our Armenian architect, repaired. So, and here's just another view of what we think he did from the outside, and you can read a little bit about it here. And this again is the sort of a deduction of 2 archaeologists who worked very carefully on the Hagia Sophia. This is again, I'll just stress, for historians of architecture, this is just wonderful information to have, remarkable information to have, and it makes Ani Cathedral really connected in a really interesting way to the wider world. And that's something that I will get back to, this idea of connection. So here we have Ani Cathedral in plan. And here you can see the interior view on the left. So just a reminder of where we have been. So I could talk endlessly about Ani Cathedral. Here's a very picturesque shot of Ani Cathedral from the east. I could talk about its design, but I also want to just kind of hit this important idea of its really dangerous condition. So this is a team of us. I actually refused to go up on the roof because it just did not seem safe. But this is a team I was working with at Ani Cathedral, up on the roof to try to determine what is the best way to stabilize it. And I'm happy to say, spoiler alert, and you could probably see it in this slide. Let me go back here, that here it is from a distance. This was taken in August, that it's under scaffolding. So that work of cultural heritage is going forward. It's taken a long time, and it's taken the hard, good work of an organization called the World Monuments Fund that worked very hard with the Ministry of Tourism and Culture, Ministry of Culture and Tourism of Turkey, but also with experts from Armenia and elsewhere to make sure the work was of the highest standard. So that is ongoing work. And I'm going to show you a few other examples of that kind of work that is that's important to pay attention to. So let me just go forward from here and sorry about this. So this is a church that has yet to receive the attention it needs. This church again was a victim of the Armenian genocide and its aftermath, what Raphael Lemkin has called the cultural genocide. So this is a church called Chhange, dedicated to Surp Sarkis, Saint Sergius, constructed in 1038. And this church is, I hope you can see, is a beautiful round church. It is constructed with, and you probably noticed this at Ani Cathedral too, with a series of arcades that envelop the outside in this wonderful, orderly way. These arcades also contain inscriptions. Maybe you can see here. So when I was talking about an archive of inscriptions, Chhange has them on each arcade almost are inscriptions. And then it rises into this wonderful, some call it an umbrella dome at the top. Chhange is one of my favorite churches. You have to walk from the city of Tekor, where that now called Digor in Turkey, that same place where we saw what was once that really extraordinary big church, and which is now kind of filled with tesek or cow dung. From Digor Tekor, you walk in the valley, a river valley, for about 45 minutes until you get to this site. And this was one of several churches, at least 5 churches, that made up a monastery called Chhange. Maybe if you looked a little bit beyond, you can see there are the foundations of these are other churches at the site. And unfortunately, Sarkis, this church, is the only one that remains. And what you will note is also that it is in serious danger of collapse. So these holes that you see, so they go all around the church. And the belief is, and this is not my idea, but is engineers have talked to me about this, that it was blown out from the inside with explosives, and that's why these so the explosives were placed inside the church, and then and so you get this kind of blown out situation. So there's certainly a call for its preservation, but nothing has been accomplished yet, and this is the state that it's in. I'm actually going to go forward a little bit. I wanted to show you a few more sites. Maybe I'm going to just jump ahead a little bit and just show you a few more buildings. Yes, I wanted to show you a church that's not far from here. This is Ani from looking inside. We're inside the church here, looking out. Ani contains a lot of churches that were ruined before the genocide. But I also wanted to show you some churches that were ruined after. And in this case, we're looking at a church called the Church of the Savior. So this is again Ani Cathedral, the Church of the Savior to the right. The Church of the Savior is an extraordinary building. I'm showing you this is a photo that I took from the early 2000s, and you can see that it's such an unusual site because the church is essentially half there. The belief is that it was that it collapsed in a storm in the 1950s. I can't imagine that it was before that in good condition, but we can't know exactly what happened to it. But I will show you some other images of it so you can see what it looks like. This church is amazing because for many reasons. One, that it looks the way it does, but also because it's 19-sided, and that's very unusual for a building of any type, particularly a medieval building where you're laying out these structures with ropes. You're planning them on the ground. You're not drawing them necessarily, but you're planning them on the ground. So a prime number, a 19-sided church, is a very strange thing. It was an audacious building, a building, again, constructed with this kind of almost skin-like masonry and covered in inscriptions, some of which you see here. Strangely, I think audaciously, it was built narrower at the bottom than at, up above. So a sort of building, you might say, designed to defy gravity. This structure, when I took these pictures, it had a terrible sort of crack running through the dome. And this is how buildings begin to fall down. What happens is that debris collects in those cracks, and they get wider and wider and wider until the collapse happens. And so what is being done now, and what has kind of been undertaken since since I've been involved with the World Monuments Fund, so for the I guess the last 2.5 decades, is a gradual stabilization and actually partial reconstruction of this building. So I'm showing you scaffolding now that's inside the church, and just some of the kind of the plans of work for it. I should say too, and this picture reminds me that another thing that's really important about these structures is they're not just they're painted on the interior. So we have a lot of fresco painting, and that needs its own special kind of care. Okay, so this is ongoing work. If you go to Ani these days, you will meet a wonderful person, an Armenian mason named Arayik, who works at the site. He's trained as a traditional stone mason, and he was brought from Armenia to do this work. He works without stopping, without taking breaks. This is a labor of love for him, and he is doing some of the completion work on this structure, the rebuilding of the structure in order for it to stay stable. And this is for him, as I said, a labor of love and an act of love. So if you do go to Ani, and you go to this church, the Church of the Savior, you will meet Araik. There's so much more I could say, and I know that I just had to show you, this is the site, and one meets all kinds of colleagues at these sites, including equine ones. But this should give you a little bit of a sense of what we're talking about when we talk about destruction. That these buildings are exceptionally well built, but like anything else, they're fragile. They're also ancient, but they contain within them so much more than just stone. And we haven't even gotten to the question of spirituality, remembering that these buildings were built as acts of devotion and acts of prayer. And so all of this makes it really tragic for us as we kind of grapple with the ongoing destruction, and the destruction, not just that what we've seen after the genocide in Turkey, but also now in Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, where we see destruction. And it seems like ages ago that, I'm just going to go forward, that we were all celebrating the wonderful show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. That was in 2018. That show was really celebrated how connected Armenia was to the world, and looked at connections between Armenia and Islamic art, and Armenia and Byzantine art, and Chinese art, and Mongol art, and from South Asia to the Philippines. And what we're facing now is really almost feels like a kind of backward step towards just defending the very sort of, I don't know, the very life of the monuments. So I just wanted to just give you a sense before I stop, and I'm just going to go forward a little bit. I have way too much in this. Before I stop, I want to talk a little bit about some of the problems that we're facing now with Nagorno-Karabakh. And for those of you who don't know, there was a devastating war in 2020, and Azerbaijan, basically as the aggressor, forced Armenia to surrender lands, historical provinces that contain hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, we could say, if we count every monument, of Armenian monuments, churches, bridges, mansions, monasteries, tombstones. And so these structures that were relinquished in the historical provinces that were seized by Azerbaijan, now there's great concern about those. What is going to happen to those sites? And we're worried in part because of what happened to an Armenian, whole Armenian landscape in the Republic of, what is now the Republic of Nakhchivan, where Azerbaijan destroyed, erased, wiped out whole landscapes of Armenian culture, including cemetery called the Julfa Cemetery. So having this as a precedent is really, for those of us who care about Armenian culture, this is really terrifying and is a kind of specter that is always in our mind. What will happen? What will happen with the remaining medieval monuments? And we've already seen erasure of sites, effacement of inscriptions, and erasure, damage to churches, and also a kind of invention of history that is claiming sites for a group called the Caucasian Albanians, about whom we know very little. And this is, admitted by authoritative scholars. But unfortunately, they have been chivied out from the recesses of history to become to be mobilized as a way to kind of de-Armenize medieval sites. So I just want to go forward and talk a little bit, and this isn't a particularly cheerful slide, but I've done enough work on monuments outside of the Republic of Armenia to know what kind of destruction is at stake here. And I just wanted to give you a few, this is just 16 different ways that you can, inflict harm on an Armenian church. And these are all kind of things that I have seen. So from razing and leveling, like we saw at Argina, using dynamite as at Chhange, the slow harvesting of materials for building, which may not be intentionally, malicious, but which destroys the building. Deliberate removal of stones not for building, just to, and I've seen this at churches where it's clear this is being done in order to bring the building down. Hacking away at supports, particularly structural areas where the building could fall. Shooting practice is something that's done particularly with sculpture and painting. And so, for example, at many churches where there is something like a carving on the outside, you can see often, if you zoom in, kind of the sort of bullet-shaped holes that clearly attest to this practice. There is simply neglect. There's quite often, when it comes to painted churches, we see defacing, and that is usually in the form of gouging out the faces and hands of figures, as well as graffiti. And graffiti is a problem. Unfortunately, it's also Armenians who sometimes did graffiti in the early 20th century. So that's not thrilling. One has to admit it. But then other kinds of forms, conversions to other buildings, particularly like buildings like places for munitions, which is inherently dangerous. Treasure hunting, the kind of silence on the Armenian identity of the buildings, and so on. So this is only a very partial list, but it gives you a sense of the kinds of ways that Armenian monuments can really lose their lives. And I think of it as that. I think of it as a kind of loss of life. I see these buildings as really not just testimonies to, they're testimonies. They're not just buildings. They're testimonies to whole communities. And so when people say to me, oh, but lives are more important, I think for me, this is a strange dichotomy, because for me, these churches represent lives upon lives. They're generations and generations who have prayed in these spaces, who paid for and constructed these spaces, who had weddings in these spaces. So for me, they are really intensely important witnesses to the past. And so when a church like this, which has become, a mosque and looks like this now. When this happens, it's very hard to cope with. And I think I'll end just by showing you this, I think a really kind of poignant and sad image, which is the wall of that church of Zepni, which is a lesser known church in the Shirak region. And if you look carefully, you can see there's an Armenian inscription here. It looks like it says something like servant of God, Bedros. There's a sundial here showing the, giving a sense of the traditional Armenian medieval way of measuring time. A kind of dove or something here, and then really the afterlife of this church down below with the crescent and star. So I think I want to stop here, and I know I've thrown a lot at you. This is really a kind of, for me, it's been a kind of reflection on my own work and the ways in which it connects with the genocide. And I'm happy to talk more about the ongoing work of restoration that's being done as well, or anything you might like. So I'm just going to stop sharing now, and glad to take questions.
While we're waiting for people to put their questions in the chat, I had a question for you.
Yes, please.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, let me put this light on. It's so dark.
After listening to you, I'm really curious about what your experience has been actually going to these sites, because it's very clear so many of these photos you took yourself, and I can't imagine what the experience must be going to these places when the communities around you that you have to move through to get to these spaces are in complete denial of their history.
Yeah.
So if we could talk about that a bit.
Sure. I want to say that it's complicated. And the people that I go, so when I travel, I don't do much traveling to these areas alone. I wouldn't feel safe doing that. But I also want to say that when I travel with like the World Monuments Fund, we are a group that includes people from all over. So, and Armenians and Turks and people from Europe, people from the United States, Americans and stuff. And our sole purpose is to safeguard the health of the monuments, and we are friends. And it's an incredibly good and healing thing to do this together with Turks who are not in denial, and who are, who with whom like there can be a rapport. And that's, for me, that's important. I will say that since the war, with with everything that's happening, the 2020 war, and I don't know if it's me or whether it's the political climate, it's probably both, but it's harder for me. And also as I get older, it's just harder and harder for me to kind of cope with the situation, the dereliction of a lot of the monuments, their state. That's hard for me. And also to cope with the claims on signage and and in tourist guides of the like Ani, Great Seljuk City. And that I find that harder and harder for me to kind of take. But I will say that I think if one can go to Ani, or or really to that whole sort of landscape, it's a magical experience, and it's an incredibly beautiful thing to see those monuments. And I feel incredibly honored to be able to kind of to advocate for them, and to do what I can to to see that they are preserved. So, but I will just say there are a lot of complicated feelings that come up when I go there. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's heartening to hear that you've found a community to do it with, even though there are times when it feels like things are backsliding.
Yeah.
We have another question from Linda. were the cities slash villages around the churches, sorry, were there cities slash villages around the churches we're seeing? If yes, were they entirely destroyed? How many extant churches that are in need of repair are being repaired? Who supports
Yeah,
them?
those are great questions, Linda. Thank you. There were whole settlements all around the churches, and one of the best ways to know that is, I mean, archaeology is one way, but in fact, there hasn't been a whole lot of archaeology. But the best way is actually just going onto Google Earth. You can see, it's incredible. You can see all around these churches that are in the middle of nowhere. You can clearly see signs of roads and you know, and habitations. So they may not have been built as well. They may have been the first things that to come down, unfortunately. But they were the other way we can have a sense of this is reading historical sources that talk about, you know, towns and cities and the people that lived in them. And so those are, but yeah, that's a great question. And then the other question was about how much help these sites were getting. And yeah, there's so many more that that need help that aren't getting it. So I showed you Chhange, that Sarkis church that was on the cliff. That time, so many. And one thing that I did with the World Monuments Fund is we actually went around to all these different churches, as many as we could, in various states of disrepair. And we made a kind of matrix because it's sort of like triage, like, okay, what's the most important building? And then what's an emergency condition? And then what's historically the most significant? What's the architectural the most significant? What's the most feasible? And we kind of made a matrix, and we ranked things. And so that's what we've done. The question is, like, then how do we get the resources to then go ahead and do the work? And then there's a kind of dance that's done with the Ministry of Culture and Tourism. So there's that too. So you have to kind of find ways to kind of fit together the expertise, the resources, the diplomatic, you know, kind of side, the engineering, the seasons. Everything has to be in place in order to get this work done. So it's a lot. And of course, as we know from this recent earthquake, when, you know, things can come down at any moment. So there's a kind of strange contrast between how fast things can collapse and then of course they're gone forever. You can't, you know, and that's something I try to talk to my students about, which is that it's, when you're working from a reconstruction, there isn't that kind of archaeological validity that that original building has. So it's different. It's never going to be the same building. Yeah. So you have a lot of things at play. And so the quick answer to Linda is no, there's so much more to do. There's so much more to do.
Going off of that, Armin has asked if you can tell us something good about restoration efforts. Do you have, like, you know, a success story or a place that comes to mind that you feel really good?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think the examples at Ani of the Church of the Redeemer, Surpurgij and Ani Cathedral are good. You know, and I think that, again, it's you have to sort of play the hand that you've been dealt. But I think those are good. And so I think working with the World Monuments Fund, those are the success stories. That's what we have to celebrate about. And I work with them. I'm not gonna let them let me go. So I will work with them as long as they will have me. And the next big church we want to work on is the Church of Maranci, which is a 7th century church. This is one that's in the middle of nowhere. You could only tell there's a settlement by looking at Google Earth, but that church was on what's called the watch list for World Monuments Fund, which means that we laser scanned it, which is great. But it really needs the next step, which is stabilization, because the south facade has almost completely collapsed. And that, that crack I showed you in Ani Cathedral on the side, that's kind of that's the first tell that wall's going to come down. And there's a huge crack on the other side of Mren, like on the north side in that same position. So that's telling you, I want to fall down. So that this isn't necessarily a happy story, but it's just that there's real attention, I would say, right now to those sites. Then the question also comes up, what about Artsakh? What about Sunik? What's going to happen? And we simply, these are the big imponderables, but those are right there. Those questions are right there, So I think I will say this, Armin, a lot of people are working hard on these problems. And I've been so incredibly honored, in the past 3 years now, to work with some of the best people in the business, whether it's engineers or philanthropists, administrators, diplomatic people, government people, NGOs who really want to make change. So it comes down to action ultimately. And as we know, once the churches are gone, they're gone. So I'm in that way, I'm really glad you gave me this platform to be able to speak about this. So
we're so glad that you were able to speak about it too. And just for anyone who's curious, I believe the church in Mren was actually the one that we used for all of our flyers.
Yes.
And so you saw that image of that church. That's going to
Yeah.
be the next project. We have a question from Zabel, which says there are lots of inscriptions on the walls. Are they documented, and what do they mostly say? Are they mostly?
Oh, it's a great question. I had a slide that I didn't show that was basically a slide giving you a sense of all the documentation of the inscriptions. And what's amazing is, yes, not all. You can find new things all the time, and they are being found, but an extraordinary number of inscriptions have been. We have a multi-volume book called Divan Hai Vimakrutyan, or the Corpus Inscriptionum Armenorum, which is which has like all these volumes. And what the scholars have done is they have photographs of the inscriptions. They have actually painstakingly sort of penned the inscriptions onto paper. And then, because medieval Armenian inscriptions are often words aren't separated, and so it's sometimes hard to know what's the end of a word. They've done all that word separation, so they've transcribed the inscriptions. So this is so useful, because those often, in the case of Armenian churches now that aren't in the Republic, we don't have the inscriptions. Maybe they're lost, maybe they're damaged, maybe that part of the building fell down. So we do have those, and the inscriptions are they're wonderful. I love when I have the time just to sit with them, and they're donation inscriptions. We have the elites who founded these churches, and they say, like Ani Cathedral, it was a queen. Her name was Katramide, or Catherine. And she talks about how this is, she's the daughter of the king of Sunik. Her name is Katramide, and that she built this church that was founded by she and her husband. He died, but she built it. And she built it for her salvation and the salvation of her sons and her family. And what she asks for is that the priests say a certain number of services in her memory and in the memory of her family, for their souls. And often at the end, there's a little sort of like a little bit of a threat, like those who perform this will be blessed. Those who aren't, may God judge those who don't fulfill my wishes. So those foundation inscriptions are wonderful, because they also give us the date. And so they give us the date and the name of the founder. Then you also get other kinds of inscriptions that are donating things. You get tax exemptions, you get everything. The churches are really just these extraordinary archives of information about, about people, about places, about events, about economic systems as well. So they're absolutely first quality historical documents.
That's so incredible. We have a lot of questions and I want to be respectful of your time. So just let me know when, you're ready to sign off.
Sure.
Let's see. How was it possible, and I apologize if I mispronounce, for Eric to continue restoration work on the church in Ani? Is he still there? Is it safe for him to be there?
Yeah. This actually gets back maybe to Armin's point. So Artsakh was somebody, this happens sometimes in the heritage field, this kind of, it's not diplomacy, maybe you could call it soft power, but it's when one individual meets another individual. And so Artsakh works there at the site with Turkish laborers, and they're, he's teaching them some Armenian. They're communicating. The Turks that work at the site are amazed at him and his knowledge and his expertise and his devotion. He's known throughout the neighboring village. It says, what does that mean? I'm not a sociologist, but I was really moved by that there was a sense, these are human beings, and that there was this connection, and they were working on this church that desperately needed the help. And they knew Artsakh, like there was this understanding that here's somebody with that expertise and devotion, and he's probably right there. What is it? It's like, it's 8 o'clock, it's early morning there. He may be there now, but this was his life. This is the most important thing in the world for him. And an honor for him to be working on this church, just like, Armenians a millennium ago. So I think he's doing what it is. And I think, yeah, he could be the subject of cruelty, of attack. Terrible things could happen to him, but I think he's doing what is, his heart is telling him to do. And I think the people around him really, really appreciate that. And so I think there's something going on there at Ani that's special.
That's such a kind of a beautiful relationship that you just described. I'm gonna see if maybe you want to pick the last few questions that we have here. If you want to take a look and see if I can speak to you. We have so many interesting questions, and I would
okay. You see. Okay. Oh, so many good ones. Who pays for the restoration? That's an interesting one. Does Turkey provide any funds? I don't think they do. I think this is all money coming from outside, but I could be wrong. And that's something I don't actually know that much about. I know, for example, that the State Department, the US State Department, has provided monies. Like the work at Maranci was undertaken with the Ambassadors Fund, which is a fund, not a lot of money, but which was used for that purpose. Oh, and who, I should have mentioned this, of course, at Ani, somebody that was really sort of closely involved was Osman Kavala, that maybe or may not be a name but Osman Kavala is a Turkish philanthropist, just like lots and lots and lots of money. And before he was imprisoned, which happened in, I think it was 2018, Erdogan put him in prison where he is today. He was so active in advocating for minority rights in Turkey and highlighting Turkey's Turkey's admitting and highlighting the fact that Turkey had a history that was a history of Armenians and Greeks and Syrians and Kurds. And you can see. And so he funded a lot of the work at Ani, and you can see why he's not, yeah. So, but it's a good question. Okay, let's see. Oh, what else can I answer? There are so many good ones here. And some of them I don't know the answer to. So there's some wonderful questions about the Artsakh monuments that that are being asked. And I, like everyone, what I do is I go on the Caucasus Heritage Watch website, chw.org, to find out my information, because that is it's a satellite monitoring system, so you can find out like what's going on with the monuments as best you can. And but I think that access, and Asia Darpinian was asking about access. I don't have any, I have no information of anybody who's been able to get into, that I know, that's been able to get into these relinquished provinces and see what the status is. So I would love to know. I'm kind of terrified to know, but yeah. And the same with Mashtots in Shushi. Yeah, you know, my sense is that when they, and this is just a sort of, I'm just speaking, making some assumptions about what you know, but like that when they covered it with that new hemispherical dome, I mean, my sense is that's maybe that's where it stands right now, but I don't know. I tried to get that listed on the watch list and I was not successful. That was like 2 years ago now. And on Akhtamar, yeah, that I think that has that museum status. It's not a mosque. I think we would know. So yeah. Yeah, what else can I answer? Okay, I did tell you something good about restoration. Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It has been so informative and deeply interesting. And I think everything that you discussed today feels very present for everyone who's here as a kind of an ongoing process. So it was really wonderful to hear from you tonight. And thank you on behalf of Chhange.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chhange. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
And I want to give a quick shout out to Gabrielle Higgins, our program coordinator, for her role in making tonight's program happen. And thank everybody who took the time to be on for this tonight to support Chhange. And thank you, Dr. Maranci, for your very enlightening presentation.
Thank you so
really,
much.
really appreciated it.
Okay. Thanks. Good night.
Good night.